It's pretty amazing to think about, India, like, ranked fourth globally for solar energy.
It is. It's huge.
And they're aiming even higher.
Right.
500 gigawatts, that's GW if you're keeping score at home of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2030. And a big chunk of that, like a whopping 280 GW, is going to be straight from solar.
Yeah. And this isn't just like an India thing, right? This is a global shift. Big time.
Exactly. And that's why we're here today. We're diving deep into all of this, the good, the challenging, the whole picture.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to look at the incredible progress India's made, but also, those hurdles they got to clear to really make this solar-powered future a reality.
Exactly. So for everyone listening, get ready for a deep dive. We've got some fascinating research to dig into.
Absolutely.
And what really jumps out, at least for me, is just how comprehensive their approach is. We're talking everything from empowering, everyday homeowners to generate their own electricity with rooftop solar through this thing called the PM Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
To these massive utility-scale solar parks popping up.
Yeah, and don't forget the focus on boosting domestic manufacturing with that PLI scheme.
Oh, right. It's like they're hitting this from every angle.
Multi-level strategy, for sure.
But let's be real. Anything this big is going to have its complications.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to get into those too, making sure the grid can handle all this new power, figuring out the economics of energy storage, and, of course, navigating those ever-changing policies.
The policy landscape is always interesting, to say the least.
You can say that again, but, it's all part of the story. We're laying it all out for you, the what, the how, and the big one, the what's next.
The future of solar in India. Buckle up.
Okay, so let's start with how far India has already come in this whole solar scene. They're not messing around, are they?
No, not at all. I mean, that fourth place global ranking, that's a statement. It shows how serious they are about changing their energy mix.
It's a big deal.
And on a global scale, it aligns perfectly with that whole push for a more sustainable future, which everyone's talking about, right?
Right.
The growth in solar capacity has been pretty remarkable, actually. From 21.6 GW back in 2018 to a solid 70 GW by June of last year.
That's a huge jump.
It is, and it really shows they're focused and, actually getting things done.
Getting it done. And remember that 280 GW target we mentioned, part of that big 500 GW renewable energy goal by 2030.
Yeah.
That tells you right there how central solar is going to be to India's energy future.
Solar is the backbone.
But it's not just about these mega projects, right?
Yeah.
There's this whole push to get individual households in on the action.
Absolutely.
Tell us about that, the whole rooftop solar thing, the PM Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana.
Yeah, so this is interesting because they're targeting specifically middle and lower income households.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea is to make solar affordable and accessible for everyday homeowners.
Or is that?
So they can be more energy independent. And this is key, reduce their monthly electricity bills.
So it directly benefits people, at the ground level.
Exactly, hitting people where it matters.
And they're putting some serious money where their mouth is.
Oh, yeah, a big-time financial commitment. They've allocated, get this, 75,021 crore
Whoa.
to install rooftop solar on, wait for it, 1 crore homes.
That's a lot of homes.
It is. And the incentives for households are pretty sweet, too. Up to 300 units of free electricity each month.
Free.
And on top of that, the potential to earn 17,000, 18,000 crores every year by selling any extra power they generate back to the grid.
So not only do they save money, they could actually make some too.
Exactly. Direct financial benefit. Can't argue with that, right?
No, absolutely not. Talk about incentivizing people. Okay, switching gears a bit. Domestic manufacturing seems like a big emphasis in all this.
Huge.
How's that PLI scheme helping them achieve that whole Make in India goal?
So the production-linked incentive scheme, the PLI, it's a way to reduce their dependence on imported solar tech, right?
Yeah.
And build up a strong domestic supply chain. If you zoom out, it's all part of that Atmanirbhar Bharat vision, that self-reliant India idea.
Right.
Basically, they're giving companies financial incentives to manufacture those high-efficiency solar panels, the photovoltaic modules, right here in India.
Makes sense. Keep things local.
Exactly. And it's working. They got 24,000 crore ready to support over 47 GW of module manufacturing capacity.
Wow.
And the investment in just the second phase of this scheme. Hold on to your hats, 93,041 crore.
That's a lot of crores.
A lot.
Yeah.
and over 1 lakh new jobs.
So it's not just about clean energy, it's about economic growth, too.
Absolutely. Jobs, investment, it's a whole ecosystem.
All right, so we've got individual homes going solar, we've got manufacturing ramping up, and then there are those massive solar parks. What's the deal with those?
Solar parks, think of them like dedicated zones for huge solar projects. It's all about economies of scale, right?
Okay, yeah.
Efficient land use, that kind of thing. You put all these projects together, infrastructure's already there, it attracts bigger investments, and you can roll out that solar capacity way faster.
Like a solar power hub.
Exactly. Plus, it helps manage some of the risks that come with these mega projects.
Smart. So are they actually making progress on these parks?
Oh, yeah. Big time. The goal is to have 50 of these parks up and running with a combined capacity of 30 HLW by 2025-26.
Ambitious.
As always.
Yeah.
But they've already got over 10,237 milliW up and running across 11 completed parks. So they're not just talking, they're doing.
That's impressive. It's clear they're thinking big and, like you said, actually getting things done. But are they, keeping up with the latest tech? Are we seeing innovation in India's solar scene?
Oh, for sure. Innovation is essential, right? Got to keep pushing those boundaries, finding new and smarter ways to use solar. And they're doing it. Floating solar plants, bifacial modules. Those are panels that can generate power from both sides. Pretty cool and smart inverters, all becoming more common.
Hold on. Floating solar plants. That sounds wild.
Right. So picture this. Solar panels, not on land, but on water. Like big reservoirs, lakes, that kind of thing. Saves precious land, which is a big deal in a place like India.
Makes sense.
And the Ramagundam floating solar plant in Telangana, that's a 100 milliW plant. That's a prime example.
So they're actually doing this. It's not just a concept.
Oh, yeah. It's happening. And then you've got the bifacial panels and hybrid inverters.
Yeah.
Not just for these massive projects, but also for rooftops.
Really?
Yep. More energy, more efficiency. It's all about getting the most out of that sunshine.
That's awesome. So they're not just relying on old tech. They're really pushing the envelope here.
Totally.
And on the global stage, they seem to be taking a real leadership role, especially with that International Solar Alliance, the ISA.
Yeah, the ISA is a big deal. It's a core part of their energy strategy and their climate leadership on the world stage. The goal is to promote solar, especially in developing countries, a lot of them in Africa. It's not just about India's own progress. It's about bringing everyone along, encouraging collaboration, investment, the whole package.
And are other countries on board with this?
Absolutely. They've got 111 countries signed up as of now. And get this, their collective goal is 450 GW of renewable energy by 2030.
Wow, that's ambitious.
Big goals. And they're not just sitting around. They've got things like the Solar X Challenge in Africa, pushing for innovative and affordable solar solutions.
So they're really walking the walk.
Definitely. Leading by example.
It's clear that India is making serious strides in solar. But, like we said earlier, it's not all smooth sailing.
Right.
Let's talk about some of those challenges, those hurdles they got to clear. And I think energy storage is a big one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, energy storage, huge topic, right?
Huge.
As India adds more and more solar, they need a way to store that energy, right?
Yeah.
So they can have power when the sun's not shining.
Makes sense.
But the problem is battery storage. It's expensive, especially for like regular homeowners who are using net metering, selling that extra power back to the grid.
So it's not really an option for a lot of people.
It's tricky. Adding storage can seriously jack up the upfront cost. Think about it. A typical 1 kilowatt rooftop system, that's kilowatt peak, might cost around $65,000 to $75,000, but add just 2 hours of battery backup. Boom.
Yeah.
Almost double the price.
Ouch.
Yeah. And that means it takes longer to make your money back. That payback period gets longer, making it less attractive in some states.
It's like a catch-22. You want to use clean energy all the time, but it costs a lot up front.
Exactly. The irony. And then you've got this policy recommendation.
Oh, right.
The Ministry of Power is advising mandatory battery storage for rooftop solar.
Really? Mandatory?
Yeah, it's meant to help with grid stability, which is a whole other thing we'll get to, but there's concern that it could slow down people actually getting rooftop solar if it's not affordable.
Because who's going to pay for it?
Exactly. It's this tricky balance, reliable grid versus keeping solar affordable.
Right. Right.
A puzzle they got to solve.
Definitely. And speaking of the grid, that's another big challenge.
Oh, yeah, big time.
All this new solar power, it's actually creating some problems for the grid itself, right?
It is. It's a bit ironic, but you can have too much of a good thing. It's called overgeneration.
Overgeneration.
Yeah, so when you've got tons of solar power flooding the grid, especially when the sun's blazing, The existing systems just can't handle it.
They weren't built for this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you get this localized overinjection, which can mess with the voltage stability, make the whole thing wonky.
Okay.
And right now, there's not enough real-time monitoring or control.
Meaning
The discoms, the companies that deliver electricity to your homes, they can't really manage all this decentralized solar power coming in all at once.
So we're generating all this clean energy, but we can't necessarily use it all effectively.
Sadly, yeah. And sometimes, get this, perfectly good solar energy gets wasted. Yeah, curtailed, they call it. It's a mess.
Yeah.
And it discourages investment, right? Who wants to put money into something that's not being used properly?
Makes sense.
And it's a financial hit to the discoms, too.
Yeah.
They're already struggling. Massive losses, like 6.77 lakh crores by 2022-23.
That's a lot.
It is. And not being able to properly manage solar just makes it worse.
Ouch. And I remember reading something about storage being recommended here too, right?
Yeah, so the Central Electricity Authority, they're advising 2-hour battery storage at the grid level to smooth things out, prevent that overinjection.
Smart.
In theory.
Thinking.
Meaning it's not happening fast enough. They're dragging their feet on implementing this.
Critical. Right.
Pretty much.
Okay, moving on. Policy uncertainty. That came up a lot in our research as a major roadblock. Why is that such a big deal?
Investors, consumers, everyone involved, they need to know the rules of the game, right?
Right.
And when policies are changing all the time, it creates uncertainty, makes people hesitant.
Yeah, who wants to invest if the rules might change tomorrow?
Exactly. And we're talking about changes to net metering policies, which we touched on before. Basically, how you get credit for the extra solar power you generate.
Right.
Tariff rules, subsidies. It's a moving target.
Right.
And it makes it hard for businesses to plan and for people to commit to solar.
I remember some specific examples in our research.
Oh, yeah. There were a few.
Yeah.
Like Maharashtra and Gujarat, pretty big players. They revised their net metering policies, the caps on how much you could sell back within a year.
A year?
Yeah, that kind of rapid change just throws everything off. And then there's the whole thing with discoms not paying on time.
Right.
They introduced those late payment surcharge rules in 2022, but those delays are still happening.
So it's still a risky business for solar developers.
Exactly.
Okay, so we talked about manufacturing, the PLI scheme, boosting those solar panel factories in India.
Right.
But it seems like there are still some challenges there, right? Achieving true self-reliance, that's a tough one.
It is. The PLI is a great start, don't get me wrong, but they're still pretty reliant on imports for some key parts.
Like what?
Polysilicon, wafers, those are the building blocks of solar cells, right?
Right.
And they're importing a lot of that, mostly from China.
Which is risky.
Very risky. Supply chain disruptions, price hikes. You're at the mercy of another country. And it goes against that whole Atmanirbhar Bharat idea, self-reliance.
Right. So how much are we talking about?
A lot. China's their biggest supplier, $3.89 billion worth of imports. That's over 60% of India's total solar equipment imports.
Wow.
They've tried slapping on customs duties to encourage domestic production, but achieving true self-sufficiency, that's a long road.
It's one thing to assemble the panels. It's another to make all the parts.
Exactly. And it's not just about the big picture stuff. There are technical challenges, too.
Oh, right. Like with those hybrid systems, combining solar with battery storage.
Yeah, those are key for the future, right? But there are some kinks to work out.
Yeah, what are those?
Well, you need these things called hybrid inverters. They're kind of like the brains of the operation, managing the flow of energy between the solar panels, the batteries, and the grid.
Right.
Problem is, there aren't any uniform standards for these things.
Right.
Meaning, each manufacturer does their own thing. Different voltages, different communication protocols. It's a mess.
So things might not work together properly.
Exactly. It can create inefficiencies, compatibility issues, all sorts of headaches, especially for those larger systems above 3 kilowatts.
So it's kind of a Wild West situation right now.
Pretty much. And then you've got the fact that most of these inverters are running below 60 V, which leads to energy loss, heat loss, all that.
So there's room for improvement.
Big time. They need to set some clear industry standards fast.
Okay, so we've got the policy stuff, the manufacturing stuff, the tech stuff. Let's not forget the actual physical infrastructure.
Right.
Land, transmission lines, all that jazz. That's got to be a challenge too, right?
Oh, yeah. Huge.
So what are we looking at here?
Well, first off, you need a lot of land for these big utility scale projects.
Makes sense.
But getting that land, that can be a nightmare. Delays, red tape, local pushback, you name it. And then, even if you get the land, you got to get that power to where it needs to go.
Transmission lines.
Exactly. And that's another bottleneck.
Bottleneck.
Meaning There's not enough capacity to move all that solar power to the grid. So you've got these solar parks built and ready to go, but they're sitting there underutilized because the infrastructure is not there.
So it's like building a highway with no on-ramps or off-ramps?
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And it's costing them time and money. The average delay for a utility-scale project, 17 months.
That's a long time.
It is. And some are delayed up to 34 months. They've waived those interstate transmission system charges, trying to help out. But the core problem, those infrastructure gaps, they're still there.
It's a big puzzle to solve.
For sure. And we can't forget about the environmental side of things.
Right, the impact on nature. That's a growing concern with any kind of large-scale development.
Absolutely. And solar, even though it's clean energy, is no exception. These big installations, especially in those delicate ecosystems, like arid and semi-arid regions, they can fragment habitats, disrupt biodiversity, all that.
Not good.
No. And pollinators, like bees, they're particularly vulnerable. They need those plants, that vegetation, and solar farms, they can disrupt all that. Plus, there's the heat island effect.
The heat island.
Yeah, those big dark panels, they absorb a lot of heat, creating these little hot spots, which can mess with the local microclimate.
Yeah.
And that impacts plants and animals.
Right. And that whole pollinator thing, that's a bigger issue, right? Not just for the environment, but for food security.
Huge issue. I mean, think about it. 75% of India's food crops, they rely on insects for pollination. If the bees can't do their thing, it's a problem.
Major problem.
Yeah. So they got to be smart about how they develop these solar farms, minimize the impact, maybe even incorporate some pollinator-friendly zones within the farms themselves.
Like designing with nature in mind.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of challenges here. It's complex, that's for sure.
Understatement. But, every challenge is an opportunity.
Right.
And our research also highlights some potential solutions, some ways to address these hurdles and really make this solar thing work.
Okay, let's hear it. What can they do?
Well, first off, they got to get smarter about pricing and grid management. Time of day tariffs, that's a big one.
Time of day.
Yeah, basically the price of electricity changes depending on when you use it. Higher prices when demand is high, lower prices when it's low, like when the sun's out and solar power is abundant.
Clever.
It is. Encourages people to shift their energy use, take advantage of those cheaper solar hours.
Right, right.
And you can combine that with incentives for grid interactive batteries so people can store that cheap solar power and use it later when prices go up.
So it's like smoothing out the demand curve, making sure the grid can handle it all.
Exactly. And it encourages people to get batteries, which helps with the storage problem we talked about earlier.
Win-win.
Exactly. Then there's the whole technical standardization thing, those hybrid inverters we talked about.
Right.
They got to get the Bureau of Indian Standards, the BIS, to set some clear national standards for those things. Battery voltage ranges, communication protocols, the whole 9 yards. Make sure everything's compatible, efficient, reliable.
Makes sense.
And on top of that, they should mandate smart inverters for all new rooftop systems.
Smart inverters.
Yeah, these are like the next generation of inverters. They can talk to the grid, adjust the power flow in real time, help keep things stable even when there's a lot of solar energy coming in.
So they're like super efficient traffic cops for the electricity grid.
Exactly. And another interesting idea, they could combine those two big schemes, the PM Kuyum, that's for agricultural solar pumps, and the PM Surya Ghar, the rooftop solar one.
Okay, how would that work?
So imagine this. Solar-powered villages.
Ooh, that sounds cool.
Right. They combine the resources, the infrastructure, the community engagement from both schemes, create these microgrids, basically self-sufficient energy systems for entire villages.
That's amazing.
It is. It boosts energy security in rural areas, creates new economic opportunities, all sorts of benefits.
This is a really creative solution.
And to make rooftop solar even easier, they should create this like one-stop digital platform.
A what?
A platform like a website where people can do everything related to solar. Apply for subsidies, find loans, connect with installers, get info on maintenance, all in one place.
So it's like Amazon for solar.
Exactly. And they could even tie it into existing digital infrastructure like UPI for payments and Aadhaar for ID verification.
Yeah.
Makes it super easy for everyone, especially in rural areas.
That's brilliant. Takes away all that bureaucratic hassle.
Exactly. And on the manufacturing side, they got to go beyond just assembling modules.
Right, we talked about that.
They need to build up those upstream industries, the ones making the polysilicon, the wafers, all those essential parts. And that means creating dedicated manufacturing clusters, maybe even offering long-term procurement contracts so companies feel secure investing in those capital-intensive areas.
So it's about building a whole ecosystem, not just individual factories.
Exactly. And they can't forget about the environmental stuff.
Right, protecting nature.
They should incentivize solar projects on land that's already been used,
Yeah.
like wastelands, rooftops, even those canal tops. And when they do build on undeveloped land, they got it designed with nature in mind.
Like what?
Elevated structures so plants can grow underneath, pollinator-friendly vegetation around the farms, corridors for wildlife to move through. It's about minimizing that footprint.
Coexisting with nature.
Exactly. And one last thing, they should really empower those local governments, the urban local bodies, the panchayats, to drive solar adoption in their communities.
Give them the power.
Yeah? Set net zero targets, offer incentives, maybe even make solar mandatory for new municipal buildings and infrastructure. Create a bottom-up push for solar.
It's like a multi-pronged attack on this whole energy transition thing.
That's a good way to put it. Policy, technology, finance, community engagement, it's all got to work together.
Wow, so we've covered a lot of ground today. It's clear that India's come a long way in solar, but there's still a lot to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But they've got a clear vision, they're making moves, and they're not afraid to innovate. That's exciting.
It is, and it's a global story. What happens in India with solar, it impacts all of us.
For sure. This is the future of energy we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's happening now.
And that brings us to our final thought for all of you listening. India's going all in on solar. We've talked about the incredible progress, the challenges, the potential solutions.
Right.
So we're curious, what do you think will be the biggest factor in determining whether they succeed? What's the key to unlocking this solar-powered future?
Think about it. It's a big question, a global question. And we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.